what I'm talking about. So I'll mainly focus on misinformation and not the solutions part. I mean, if I have some time, I'll maybe talk briefly about the solutions, but not really focus on it. So I guess, the first thing I want to say is why WhatsApp? Like, why is that, like, one platform very important? So the obvious answer is it's very popular, right? Like, so we have these huge numbers. So over 2 billion active users globally, many of them in the global south, like in India, 600 million Indians are on WhatsApp. Almost 100% of Brazil's internet population is on WhatsApp. One thing that not many people know, at least I didn't know, is that a quarter of the US population is on WhatsApp, which is the same fraction as Twitter, right? Like, and we are really worried about, oh, the Twitter API is dying and all of that. Like, but nobody is even thinking of WhatsApp as a platform where things are happening, and so that it is important. One big special characteristic about WhatsApp is that, which makes it very difficult to study, is that it is end-to-end encrypted. So it's one of the largest social media platforms that is encrypted. Like the other popular ones are Signal, which is orders of magnitude smaller. And what end-to-end encryption very briefly means is, okay, in general, if Alice sends a message to Bob on a typical social network, it's first delivered to a social network server and then delivered to Bob, right? And the server can see what the message is. In an end-to-end encrypted context, this message is first encrypted on Alice's end, and then transferred, encrypted, and then decrypted on Bob's end, right? So WhatsApp server cannot see what the content of that message is. It could just be a hello Bob, or it could be something very dangerous, right? Like, so WhatsApp can only know, because of encryption, what A sent to B, not what the content of that message is. And this is very important in, like, for us to get data, for us to, for WhatsApp to moderate content or to stop misinformation or whatnot. Okay, let's now talk about misinformation. So I'll start with the good news. So misinformation is very hard to spread on WhatsApp, right? Again, okay, what do we mean by misinformation? Here we combine the terms mis and disinformation. We use those interchangeably. So this is false and inaccurate information. So there could be information that is deliberately chosen to be false or not. So just to make things very clear, like, we just combine mis and disinformation. That's what I mean by misinformation throughout this talk. And the reason why this WhatsApp is well designed is that it's designed to be a one-to-one communication platform, right? Like, it's mainly a chat platform that you interact with one-to-one. It's, in that sense, it's very decentralized, and there's no ability to broadcast your content to millions of people, right? Like, so there's no one way, for instance, you could click on a button and then a million people could see your message. So that ability does not exist by default. By design, WhatsApp is not built like that, unlike your Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, where you can reach like these large numbers of people and broadcast content. That does not exist on WhatsApp. And surveys have shown that WhatsApp is much more trusted than other platforms, partly in reason because of that previous point, which is that there are no influencers or strangers that you follow on WhatsApp. It's mostly you getting content from people you trust. These are close friends and family usually. So information there is much more trusted. There are no artificial metrics of virality or encouraging people to engage in behaviors that kind of get this at likes or shares or followers. Like, even if someone wants to spread their message virally, they don't know how many people actually saw their message, right? Like, so there are no metrics like that. And related to that, there is no interference by the platforms. There is no newsfeed personalization. There are no algorithms that are changing the way you see content. It's all what you subscribe to, right? So with all these in mind, right, like, so the thing is, like, okay, spreading misinformation on WhatsApp is not that easy compared to other platforms like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or your other platforms, right? So again, by the way, like, stop me and ask me questions if you have any questions in the middle. So okay, given that, right, okay, it's very hard to do that. But of course, there is a lot of misinformation on WhatsApp. It spreads on WhatsApp. And that's because, okay, that's where these people are, right? Like, there are billions of people. So obviously, some strategic actors could be, political parties or foreign actors. They're invested and interested in kind of spreading misinformation on WhatsApp. Let's look at one such strategic actor in this talk, which will be politics and political parties on WhatsApp. So politics is huge on WhatsApp, especially in countries like India. So this is from a New York Times piece which talks about WhatsApp being very important. This was in 2018 during Karnataka elections in India. The same with Brazil. So this guy really made use of WhatsApp like very extensively, creating like a large WhatsApp ecosystem. So it's also very big politics in Brazil on WhatsApp. And the main way people do this is by creating these groups. So and the groups on WhatsApp are small in size by design. Like again, there's no way to really broadcast your message. So the groups were 256 members at max until recently. They increased that recently to 1,000 members. Again, like this used to be the case that anyone could create and add members to a group. Now that has changed a bit, but this used to be the case until maybe 1 year ago. And because of that, what political parties did is just create these massive infrastructures with large numbers of groups. So this is from that New York Times piece I showed you earlier. This claims that the BJP and Congress in Karnataka, just in a local election in India in 2018, set up at least 50,000 WhatsApp groups, right? And the same, for another election in India, local election in a state, 70,000 WhatsApp groups were created apparently. So, and then there is, this is a video of a person showing the messages that he's getting on his phone on WhatsApp. So this is all the groups that he's a part of, and that guy is Bolsonaro. Like he's showing off like that he has this infrastructure of so many groups that he's maintaining, that he's getting like information from, and what his party maintains. And overall, like what we know about the strategy used by political parties to spread messaging on WhatsApp is create tens of thousands of groups, like maintain this very large infrastructure of groups where you have some content about political discussions, government policies, religion, etc. Seed them with volunteers to keep the discussion alive. So you have some sort of again infrastructure of people who actually post and repost and forward and do that kind of stuff. Until recently, we didn't know the scale of this, but there was this Washington Post article like a few weeks ago, which talked to people in Karnataka, and it says, that the BJP had an apparatus of 150,000 social media workers just in Karnataka. Again, I don't want to believe this number, but still, like it shows the scale, right? Like it's still, even if it's not 150,000, even if it is an order of magnitude smaller, that's 15,000 people, tens of thousands of people, that's very expensive, right? So that's the kind of stuff that exists there. And even if you have the people and the groups, you need content. So what you do is you have some sort of an IT cell or a content creation infrastructure where you create content, you push that content top down. Okay, even then, like if you want your content to spread, you might create 50,000 WhatsApp groups, but if it's only those 50,000 WhatsApp groups, that's not really spreading much. Like, you only reach those, you're preaching to the choir, like if it's only these groups that you've created. So you need to create some content that can spread organically. So, people resort to creating these sorts of very engaging content like memes. Okay, so all these are hearsay or like that what we heard either mostly from the political parties themselves or through journalistic accounts. So we don't have real solid proof for showing that this really exists. And the goal of this talk is to show that this is what actually exists and to actually quantify what exists out there, how political parties in India use WhatsApp, and to identify the prevalence of issues like misinformation, hate speech, etc. on WhatsApp. So the outline is going to be that I'll talk about three things. I focus a lot on data collection on WhatsApp. So again, that might be slightly a non-ideal choice, but it's very hard. Okay, I'll say this word very hard a lot of time, but these are hard. And yeah, so I'll spend a lot of time on like how did we actually get this type of data and what we are thinking about getting better data and all of that stuff. Then I'll show you some information on the prevalence of various issues like misinformation, hate speech, etc. And then I'll show you some potential solutions that exist out there, what we are working on. Okay, so the first hard is here. So data collection, so the reason why it's hard is that, this is not a typical social media platform, right? Like there's no API where you can just, ask for data or buy data, things like that. it's almost all private data, right? It's one-to-one conversations. So it's very, not, there's very little public parts of WhatsApp to get data from. And the third reason is end-to-end encryption. So even WhatsApp does not have data, right? Like, so even WhatsApp does not know what is spreading on their platform. So you cannot just work with WhatsApp and get this type of data. So that's why it's hard. So we designed these three distinct methodologies to collect and look at like various parts of WhatsApp to get a sense of like, how different things are working. I go through each of those, the three ways. The first way is by monitoring public WhatsApp groups, and this was done around 2018-19, so almost 5 years ago. And these public groups are groups which are created by political parties, let's say, or political party supporters. And the admins can make a group link available publicly. So the admins can just say, hey, here's a group link to my group, join it. And they advertise it on other social media platforms. So we just created a bunch of social media platforms, got a lot of these links. And these links, again, like these groups are small by default. These were limited to 256 members back when we got this data. Now they're limited to 1,000 members. And these are widely used in India and in Brazil. Like these are, most of us may not be a part of these, but surveys were done that show that 1 in 6 users in India and Brazil are a part of such, political groups that discuss politics with strangers, related to some sort of political party. And so getting this type of data, required some sort of non-trivial infrastructure to set up. Right? So the idea here is that we bought a lot of cell phones, and we created WhatsApp accounts on those cell phones. And the reason why we had to buy these cell phones is that because of encryption, the data is not stored on WhatsApp server, it's stored locally on your device. So we had to, we bought like around 24 cell phones and joined like a few hundred groups in each of those phones. And so firstly, we had to find and join those groups. So we got around like 10,000 public groups, like groups where the link was publicly available. We filtered them and said, okay, these are related to politics in India. Found and joined them. Then the database, or like the actual content, is stored on your device. So you actually go and retrieve that database, right? Like, so there's a lot of engineering here and a lot of like dealing with like phones and exporting data and that sort of stuff, and reverse engineering where WhatsApp stores what data, how, and how do you download data and all of that stuff, right? But this is very large scale, like, so again, subjective, large scale, so 5 million messages, around 10 terabytes of data. Okay, very impressive according to me, but okay, what is the sampling frame? Like, so what are we getting here? Unfortunately, we don't know. Like, we don't know what we are getting here, right? Like, so it's probably a very small portion of all of WhatsApp, right? Like, again, like I said in the beginning, most of WhatsApp is private. If something is public, like that's probably not, not representing a majority. So I'll show you these diagrams. Like, these are how I think about the sampling frame, like what we have. So if you say this is all of WhatsApp, this is what we got. So you may not be able to see that, but that is what we again, like, this is my mental model. This is not something scientific, but this is what I think we got. Like, let's zoom in. Okay, this is what we got. Okay, now let's move on to the second data collection strategy. So I'll talk about what we did with that data combined with this data. So this was around 2019-20, so 1-2 years later, where what we did is we joined private WhatsApp groups with admin consent. And the way we did this is we had an on-ground survey of around 3,000 political party social media workers. So what we did is we went on the ground to political party offices in UP, North UP, and we went to a political party offices. We covered almost all major political party offices. We went there, we asked, hey, is there a social media person here who's working on social media? If there was, then we asked, hey, we are researchers. Do you want to add us to a WhatsApp group that you manage? And now most political parties have a WhatsApp strategy and like a person who manages WhatsApp. And okay, as ridiculous as that sounds, we were added to some groups, like roughly around 500 groups. We were added to roughly around 500 political party WhatsApp groups. So these were like private groups, right? Like, so these are not accessible publicly. They discussed politics. So these are for internal party operations and things like that. This gave us a decent enough data set, right? Like, it's a long term, 9 months, over 1 million messages. Most of it is BJP, like around 60% is BJP, SP is 30%, BSP Congress the rest. But one thing that I say throughout, when you mean WhatsApp and we're getting WhatsApp data, there's no competing voice other than BJP on WhatsApp. Like the kind of strategy and infrastructure they have is unrivaled, and even after 10 years now, like no other political party really can match the kind of stuff that these people have. And so most of the stuff that I'll talk about when you say WhatsApp and politics, it's BJP stuff. Okay, now let's look at sampling frame, right? Okay, again, probably very impressive, right? But still a very, very small and convenient sample. But okay, it gives you some insight into what these private groups are talking about. Obviously, I mean, there's a lot of self-selection going on here, right? Like, so we went to the party office, asked, hey, give us the groups. And they wouldn't add us to the really spicy groups, I'm assuming, right? So keeping that in mind, okay, it is a bias sample, but one thing we realized, even when we were talking to those people or when we were coding some of this content, is that what we consider, we as in like academics, researchers who are based here, consider as spicy and problematic may not be the stuff that people who are giving us the data consider as problematic, right? Like, so again, that doesn't really mean anything, but that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so again, my non-scientific diagram, how this looks like. This is all of WhatsApp. This is the first data set. This is the second data set. Right? So very, very small. So it probably intersects a bit with that public data set that we got earlier, but it's still like very, very small. Okay, so what did we do with this data? So first thing we realized is that a lot of the content in these groups was non-textual, meaning it was all images, videos, audio, and so on. So we focused on images, so which made up around 40% of the content in these groups. What we did is we randomly sampled 10% of the images, so that's around 40,000 images, and we hand-coded them for partisanship, misinformation, hate speech, and so on. We got 3 independent coders. And so the results I'm going to show are on this sort of 10% random sample. So it shows prevalence in the entire data set because this is a random sample. Okay, so the first result is the overall prevalence of misinformation. So the fraction of images that we classified in our hand coding as misinformation are 3%, right? So this is in line with what people have shown on representative samples on Facebook or Twitter. In general, the prevalence of misinformation fraction of overall content is very low. Again, like this is a voluntary donation, so it probably is on the lower end of what things could be. Also, again, just to remind you, the definition of misinformation is factual inaccuracy is deliberately spread falsehood, so it's mis and disinformation, both of them, but we don't know in many cases whether something was deliberate or not. So this is 3%, but if you condition on an image mentioning or being about Muslims, this is around 8%, right? So that's interesting. Okay, next result is about hate speech. So one thing is there's not much explicit hate speech in the data set, right? Like explicit as in, okay, let's, Muslims are traitors, that sort of stuff. It's very rare. Most of it is just like fearful, like saying, oh, Hindus will be minorities in 2050, or like, things like that. Or like, okay, Muslims damage our temples and things like that. So, so the fraction of images classified as explicit hate speech was around 2%. Again, if you condition that on being about Muslims, around 20%, right, which is very surprising. It's similar, like if you take the BJP subsample out of that, it's around 30% or so. Okay, so that's the second result. The third result is that only half of the content in these groups is partisan, meaning anything related to politics. Only around 40% of it is related to politics, right? And this is surprising because these are all party-related groups created by the party for political content dissemination, things like that. Most of it was just, most of even these sorts of partisan content, this 40% was not very clear. Like it was not saying, yeah, Modi is great, or that sort of very clear political messaging was not in these groups, which is surprising. Most of it was just, local selfies, gatherings, religious events, local issues, like things like that, which was not what we expected in them. right? So then we ask this question, okay, what is the role of these groups? So why create all of these, hundreds of groups or thousands of groups if there's no clear like messaging or political information is not spreading through those, right? And I mean, I don't have an answer. This is not a survey. We did not do a survey here. So my hypothesis is that this is just to create a sense of community, right? Like, so the people in these groups actually are just sharing local selfies and local gatherings. They meet with each other. They meet with each other on WhatsApp. They're in touch regularly, exchange other information, jokes and memes and all of that stuff. And so it creates a sort of sense of community. That's one reason we found. The other reason, maybe this is not the sole reason, or like this is not an exhaustive set, is to use WhatsApp to manipulate other platforms. So this is another example that we found where this sort of huge infrastructure of like these hundreds and thousands of WhatsApp groups are used to manipulate other platforms. What that means is using WhatsApp group infrastructure, like let's say you have, I don't know, 10,000 groups and then there's 200 people in each of them, so that's a lot of people. Use them, like this, people who are your supporters in these groups, to mobilize users to another platform like Twitter, like where you, like this is a message that we got on one of our WhatsApp groups that we are a part of. So here it says, okay, let's trend this hashtag in support of Modi ji, and there's a template like a sample tweets attached to that. So and the Google Doc looks like this, right? Like so, this is a hashtag, a date and time, and a few hundred example tweets that mention like what exactly people need to tweet about that specific topic. Okay, and there's like hundreds of such examples in our data set, right? Like, and so this is one such Google Doc. There are many examples that we saw. And now the task of these members in these WhatsApp groups is at 9 a.m. on that day, log on to their Twitter, take one of these tweets and paste it onto their Twitter profile. Right, like so. So if you take the first example from that Google Doc, you have like hundreds of people just copy pasting the exact same tweet onto their Twitter profile, right? And it's exactly the same. Some people were creative, added pictures, and it even probably says it here, sample tweets, please check before you tweet. And some people, really change it a bit, but most of it is exactly the same. Some people add other hashtags or other usernames, but these are all the same thing. If the second example is the same, the second tweet from the Google Doc, people just copy pasting the exact same thing. Again, like the important thing is all of these are real users. So these are not bots. This is not an automated activity. This is real people. Again, these are all, some of them are verified users when verification meant something. And most of them were like also like MPs or members of the Legislative Assembly or like ministers even, right? Like so there's, a lot of people do follow this. And the reason they do this is to get the hashtags trending, right? So, and we studied 75 campaigns in our data set. We found 75 of those. 69 of them were trending on the day this activity is supposedly happening, right? And so this is a super successful strategy. It really mobilizes, makes use of this sort of resource of WhatsApp groups to actually get things trending on Twitter. And we trained like a simple classifier to detect which trends were manipulated, and we found that over 1,000 campaigns were run in the last 3-4 years when we studied this 2 years ago. So almost every day, if you look at even Twitter today in India, if you look at the trending topics page, anything that supports the BJP is manipulated using this way. And it's super successful. It's not against the terms of service of Twitter because these are all real accounts, so it's genuine political activity, right? Like so they don't take this down, even though, or they give the trending status. And the importance of trending status is that around 40% of tweets in each campaign were not from that Google Doc, right? Like so there's new tweets as well. So probably what's happening is people saw that, okay, this hashtag is trending, and then they saw that on the trending page and added their own tweet, right? So that's what's probably happening, and that's, I think, what the reason for doing this is, right? Like so you use WhatsApp to get things trending on Twitter, and that sets the tone of the conversation. Sometimes, your media will pick that up, and then that creates the loop where, again, you talk about, oh yeah, the media is covering this issue on your WhatsApp groups, then you do that over and over, right? Like, so we have a paper where we show this sort of relationship between the Twitter hashtags and what the debates on these primetime shows do, right? Like, so there's some relation here. So basically, the idea here is that, again, this is not something wrong, right? Like, so this is not, this is genuine, like, political campaigning. This methodology is even used, for non-BJP purposes, like, for instance, the CAA protests, like, people use these, like, if you remember the toolkit, like, this was the toolkit, right? So this is the same. Everyone does this now. But the problem is, especially this sort of closed platform, closed nature of WhatsApp, so no one knows that this is being artificially created. Like, all of these are templates that were already created. So the regular users who don't know this don't know this, right? Like, so that this infrastructure is being used and and Twitter is actually amplifying that content, even though this is being artificially manipulated. Okay. So that was the second data set and some examples of what we found on these data sets. Now let's look at the third and final data collection try that we did. This is very recent, recently, and even it's going on now. So instead of looking at it from a top-down perspective, like, in the previous two data collections, we looked at what the BJP is doing, right? Like, looking at political parties, how they're using WhatsApp. Now we try to look at more bottom up, right? Like, where we got consent from people, from normal users. So these are regular users in villages in India or elsewhere. And we developed a tool where users can easily donate their data to us for research. And the tool is called WhatsApp Explorer. It's this sort of easy way to collect data. Basically, it's built on top of web WhatsApp, so it just emulates web WhatsApp and just builds a layer on top of it to make it easy to get for users to donate data. And the way it works is, we go on the ground, like we go door to door, let's say. We explain the process. We generate a QR code on our system, right? And ask the user to scan the QR code from their phone. Like, so this is like signing on to web WhatsApp, but they're signing on to our platform. And so you generate a QR code, and then once you scan the QR code, we are able to get a list of all the groups that you are a part of. Right? So you get a list of groups that you are a part of, and then you can select which ones you want to donate. So we basically concentrate on groups with greater than 5 members. So just to avoid any personal messages or any personal chats. So users cannot even donate groups with less than 5 members, and with some sufficient activity, so certain number of messages in the past certain amount of time. And users have the choice to exclude any or all groups that you can, yeah.
So even if one person in a group has consented, so other people don't have?
Yeah. So this is only, that's one of the big privacy issues with this, is that this is not getting consent from all the members of the group. It's only one person consenting. And and that's why we're focusing on these largish groups, like where to avoid some sort of personal information being shared, yeah. Okay, then what we do is, what data do we get? We get, once they agree, we get the past 2 months of their data and the next 2 months of data. So from the day they scan the QR code, we get the past 2 months and the next 2 months from the groups that they agreed to share. We get the network, like, so all the contacts and who they've chatted with. And there's a lot of work in anonymization that is done here. So all the data is anonymized before it is stored. So we remove all mentions of names, emails, phone numbers, so on. We blur all faces, and all of that is done before the data is stored. And then we have a small survey, what they gave, what they didn't give, just to know, like, the type distributions, the types of groups, and so on. And then you get some money. Okay, so basically we did this pilot very recently, just a month ago, with around 400 users in UP and Jharkhand. So this is north of India and central India. And okay, these are some pictures from there. Basically, the way it works is we get their consent. So the person who has these two phones is our enumerator or the surveyor. Get their consent. The phone below is where our system is, where the QR code is generated. That's the user's phone. We scan the QR code, and that's how we get the data. Uh, so yeah, let's talk about sampling. So, I mean, one of the reasons why we did this is actually to get like a truly random sample of WhatsApp and to really get some numbers of the prevalence of all these misinformation and all of that stuff. So we first tried random sampling, where we actually went door to door randomly, and then asked people, hey, to use WhatsApp and get the consent and all of that stuff. But especially in villages in UP, not many people use WhatsApp, right? Like, so, I mentioned this 600 million number. It seems very big, but that's still like, 400 million people are missing there who are adults in India, right? So they don't use WhatsApp, and majority of them are based in villages in India. Even if people have WhatsApp data, they don't necessarily have these large groups that we are interested in. So this sort of random sampling really did not get us anywhere. So what we did instead is now we sampled through influencers, meaning we just identified some popular users in a village. Again, this is through some local knowledge. Sampled, just give them some money, and then they sample quotas, right? Like, so we have quotas for age, caste, and religion. So we get a certain number of people for each of these different quotas. Okay, so, and in general, like, this was much harder than we anticipated it to be. Obviously, okay, this is very private data, so a lot of people were not so willing to give their data. So it's the kind of success rate was around 10%. It's impossible to sample women, so there are, like, we tried really hard, like even using women surveyors and a lot of that, like, but especially in the rural context in India, women either don't have phones or don't have the trust to trust us, like, all of that stuff, really. So our sample is 100% men. It's hard to sample users over 40, like, so most of them are not necessarily online. And one question we have is, like, okay, is a representative sample here actually what we need, right? Like, so if we want to show prevalence on WhatsApp, we probably have to sample active WhatsApp users, and that's very hard to really have a baseline to get the sample from, right? Like, and yeah, if there are any better ways, like, I'd love to hear more in the Q&A. Okay, so some details about the sample. This is specifically the sample from UP. This is around 378 users. So we have over 1,000 groups from these people, and 500,000 messages collected, like, in the last month or so, and some information on, like, WhatsApp use, like, that might be interesting. So I'm looking at the mean here. So the number of personal chats on average in a person's phone is 140. So they're in touch with, like, 140 people / groups. Out of that, group chats is on average around 17. So 17 group chats on average. Number of consented groups, so number of groups that on average people have given us is around 3 per user. Number of messages we log per user on average is around 1,100, and the average age is around 34. So the max is also interesting. So there were people who had 879 personal chats, 165 groups. They gave us 40 groups. I mean, not the same people probably, but anyway. So there were people who also gave us like 25,000 messages. And there, we have like this sort of breakdown over caste and religion and political affiliation. One thing that's interesting again is that this is, I guess this is a reality on the ground as well. Like, majority of our data comes from supporters of the BJP. Supporters, as in these are regular people who support the BJP. Okay, so this is still like a better sample than your other samples, which are convenience based. Right, like, we're working on a bigger, better sample. So I'll talk about this later. Again, this final unscientific plot. Look, if these are your two data sets, this is probably what we have from our third data set, right? Like, so it's maybe not, again, like, on the broader scheme, it's still very small, but it's still like somewhat spread a bit more. Like, you still are getting some more coverage of like WhatsApp, like overall. Like, that's my impression, especially because we also get some other kinds of viral content and things like that. So I'll talk about that in a second. So I think this is slightly better than the other two data collections that I talked about. Okay, so what kind of content do we get from these groups? So specifically, I mean, we get all the messages that were sent in these groups and so on. But very interestingly, we capture this sort of viral content. This is content that was forwarded many times, right? Like, so if you use WhatsApp, content that is forwarded in a chain of at least 5. So if I post something and people forward this 5 times, starting from me, that's labeled as forwarded many times. So chain of 5 in a network is actually huge. Like, it could be really, really far from where I am, right? Like, so for instance, a Facebook network of 1 billion people, the diameter of that is 4, right? Like, so 5 is quite big in network terms. So, but we don't know like what this 5 means. And it's at least 5, so we don't even know if it is 1 million times or only 6 times, right? Like, so, but this is the definition that we have for viral content, like content forwarded at least 5 times in a chain, like not necessarily independently. So what we did is we manually coded 600 viral content from our Jharkhand sample around July and August 2023. And so next, I'm going to talk about the types of viral content, like what did we find in the 600 pieces of forwarded many times content. And I'll talk specifically about misinformation, hate speech, propaganda, and so on. So the first very surprising finding is that of these 600 messages, 26% was misinformation. So this is very surprising, right? Like, so I showed you earlier that overall consumption of misinformation is very low, but the content that is virally spreading, a quarter of that is misinformation, which is really, really concerning and surprising, right? Like, so that it is this much. Like, again, like, the sample is biased, but the sample needs to be understood. Like, so these are normal villagers. We did not pick BJP supporters. We did not pick extremists for any reason. Right? So these are normal people we just sampled in a village. So this is what we get. So this is the type of stuff people are organically forwarding. This is an example of a misinformation post. So this is a claim. I mean, this is in Hindi. I translated to English. This is a screenshot from this page on cadbury.com.au. This is in Australia, but it says, on top of the actual screenshot of the page, some commentary has been added, like this thing, company acknowledgement, and this thing. So the page actually exists. This is a real page. It's an Australian page on Cadbury Australia that talks about some Australian products that are being sold in Australia having gelatin, beef in them, which is halal. But then the commentary that is added is saying that Cadbury has admitted that all its products contain halal certified beef, meat from mother cow, right? Like, so that's the commentary that is added, and someone else has also added like these dairy milk pictures here showing that dairy milk actually contains beef. This is not true, right? Like, so this is the type of misinformation. I mean, it's kind of PSA, like telling people, but there's also that tinge of there's halal stuff in your food, right? Like, and a lot of that is a mix of hate and misinformation. A lot of misinformation is hatred as well. Like, so 44% of that 26% is misinformation, is hateful as well. And here we really cannot underplay the role of mainstream media, right? Like, so a lot of information that is on mainstream media, like clips from the big name journalists or anchors on TV, really resurface in these viral content, like all these things about Corona jihad or whatnot, right? Like, so they resurface, and this is where that cycle exists, right? Like, where you actually seed something through WhatsApp on social media that's picked up on TV, then that's picked up on WhatsApp again, made viral. Again, like, so the important thing that notice here is this is viral organically, right? Like, these are normal people spreading this. Even though someone seeded this information, people are actually really consuming this and spreading this organically. So that's important here. Okay, and because we have caste groups, we know the types of hate and stuff that happen there. The caste groups disproportionately have a majority of hate and misinformation in them. Okay, then let's look at hate speech. So in the 600 sample we coded, 20% of it is hate against Muslims, and a majority of it is just like hate, inciting fear, or trying like encouraging people to do something, right? Like so this is an example. Uh, it's very long, so I'll not read through it, but it says, okay, there's a, it's this lot of love jihad kind of thing where, okay, a Muslim boy kidnapped a Hindu girl, and then all Muslims who worked were fired, and so that's how we should treat these Muslims. For sure, I'm pretty sure this is fake. Like, I'm from Andhra. There's no Jain community in Andhra, and no Muslims, so tens of thousands of Muslims were fired. So for sure, like, this is false. But also, like, this is the type of stuff, like, okay, it's a mix of misinformation, hate, and it's kind of saying, okay, we should not hire Muslims, or we should fire Muslims to teach them a lesson. That sort of stuff, like very scary stuff. But the prevalence, again, organically viral, 20%. The most important thing that we found, which is like shocking, is these two categories, like religious propaganda to influence Hindus or pro-BJP political propaganda. These could overlap. It's around 20%, right? Like, again, like I'm saying this the fourth, fifth time, is these are not BJP-related groups. These are just a village group, friends group. I don't know, the thing about study group, or things like that. And still there is like fifth of that is pro-BJP propaganda that tries to influence Hindus, right? Like, so things like this. Again, this is a Hindi meme that is being translated into English. It says, okay, a very important thing to keep in mind before taking any decision. It says, okay, there's Hindus and BJP standing. If you kick the BJP, you will also fall, right? Like, so something like that. This is typical BJP stuff being organically spread in virally on the groups that we are monitoring, right? So one thing we realize, again, I don't have concrete proof for this quantitatively. Qualitatively, we observed this a lot. Almost every event is spun as a pro-BJP, anti-Congress, or anti-Muslim. There's a spin around that, right? Like, so the train derails and a lot of people are killed. There's a Muslim angle involved in that. Or BJP loses in Karnataka. There is an anti-Congress angle in that. Like, there's Gaza and Israel, like, which is not even related to these villagers, right? Like, but okay, there's a anti-Nehru, anti-Muslim element in that, and a lot of stuff is spreading in there. I can show you, like, if I open, so we have a dashboard where we are monitoring this. Today, for sure, there'll be some anti-Gaza, like, or pro-Israel kind of stuff that is widely spreading on WhatsApp. Okay, the next thing is anti-BJP content. Okay, it does not exist at all. Like, there's almost zero. So there is no competing narrative. There is no, like, I mean, it's unbelievable how bad or how unprepared these other parties are in terms of spreading their narratives. I mean, again, like, if you sample like 400 people, you would expect at least one or two narratives or a dozen narratives to be here. There's no such thing at all. Okay, the other surprising thing is most viral content is national. So even, again, like I said, like, these are all local groups, these are village groups and caste groups and so on. Only 8% of it is about their region or their village. Again, this is viral content. Most viral content is national. Okay, finally, the entertainment content. Again, this is something that I expected to be a lot more. I mean, WhatsApp, if you're on WhatsApp, there's a lot of these good morning messages and so on. And there's this very popular article about how Indians are really sending a lot of good morning messages. I mean, it's true, right? Like, we do send a lot of those. They make up roughly 4% of our viral content, right? Again, good morning messages being viral, like, meaning that people are just forwarding the same thing. But other educational content, commentary, satire, those roughly make up 20% as well. But this is still, I mean, I was expecting that this will be 60% or something. This will be the majority. This is not. Like, this is still like less than how much misinformation is there in those 600 we coded. Okay, the final result is about fact checking. Again, non-existent. Fact checking as a solution for misinformation, especially in this context on WhatsApp, is useless. Like, it's really, nobody knows about fact checking. Nobody cares about fact checking. There's a lot of content that is already fact checked going back 10 years. It's the same content that's fact checked over and over in mainstream fact checking sources. it does not reach these audiences. Nobody knows about this, nobody cares around this. So around 40% of our data, even today, again, like if I open that dashboard today, I can show you memes or misinformation images that were shared 10 years ago, that were debunked 10 years ago, right? And this is one very favorite example of mine. This is claiming to be, Rajiv Gandhi and Rahul Gandhi praying like Muslims, taken out of context. This was fact-checked like starting from 2015, every year, right? 2015, 2016, 2018, 2019, 2020, like still, like this is today spreading on WhatsApp, right? Like so, it does not work. Okay, so what are solutions for this? Like what can we do? So again, like the main issue here is this is a very hard problem because of encryption. Like so, WhatsApp does not have access to the content. So if you take other platforms like Facebook or Twitter, they can just hire a lot of moderators and you can build your machine learning models on top of them. And then you can moderate content, right? You can say, oh yeah, this is hateful, this is not, or you identify that this same thing is spreading again, and you take this down, or down rank, or do things like that. WhatsApp cannot see the content, so you cannot have a central content moderation. And there's very limited stuff that WhatsApp can do. Like one is this sort of top-down, which is imposing frictions of virality, like so limiting the number of forwards you can do. Again, we have a paper that shows that that does not work. I mean, it works to slow things down, but if you have an invested actor like this, which who has this 150,000 members to just spread your content, they can just do it over and over, right? Like if you can just forward 5 people at a time or 1 person at a time, you just do it over and over, like so that's not stopping anyone. And there are these bottom-up solutions that currently exist, which is based on crowdsourcing. It's this called this tip line, which is you set up a WhatsApp number and users forward tips to that. And WhatsApp is actually tips as in content, and they ask, hey, is this true or not? WhatsApp is funding a lot of these tip lines, which exist in like fact checkers and journalist newsrooms, where they monitor these phone numbers, WhatsApp numbers, and if they get something, they will fact check it, and send a response back. And so, I worked on, so it looks like this. So you get a piece of content, and then a bot will respond, and then a human will look at it and then fact check it if it has not already been fact checked. So I worked on building some technology to scale this sort of fact checking, and this really can scale up, like, because the technology is quite good these days. So there are a lot of tip lines working in 6 Indian languages, 11 tip lines by different journalists, newsrooms, and fact checking organizations, some of them very big. But the issue is that this is not scalable. Like, so this does not work at the WhatsApp scale, right? Like, to tell you a number, WhatsApp had this very big tip line, or very massively advertised tip line, if you remember, during the 2019 election. They really did a lot of PR on this. They advertised this in national and international media that, hey, send your misinformation to this phone number and we'll get it fact checked. I worked on that data. So we got 100,000 tips during the 3-month election period. Just, again, 100,000 might seem like a large N. Just in context, every day on WhatsApp, there are 55 billion messages sent, right? Like, so take that by 30, multiply that by 30. Like, so out of that, 100,000 were actually sent here. So an opt-in model is not the right way. I mean, or at least it does not work. So we are working on like variants of that where, we can think of like, having someone in your network actually do the fact checking instead of having like a stranger fact checker where you actually have to send it to a fact checker. Because a large amount of misinformation can be easily debunked, subjective, but does not have to be a trained fact checker. You either reverse image search. Again, my data shows that 40% of it is already debunked. Right? You reverse image search, you find a link, just say, hey, this is not true, right? And crowdsource fact checking, there's community notes and all that. That is something that works, right? Like, so instead of having it top down, have it bottom up, and then you can do some sort of technology on top of that. Like, if you can, in an encrypted setup, you can identify that this is already debunked. You can do something like that, and probably this is the only way that you can fact check on encrypted platforms. Again, how this is exactly operationalized is not clear. We're trying to think of a way to actually run a study that kind of incentivizes people in networks where you can try to debunk misinformation. But I don't have any results there. Okay, so what are next steps? One is building better data collection tools with better sampling, including privacy. So one issue we have is, okay, this worked in India because we have a network of surveyors that could go door to door or could recruit people who people can trust. We want to do this in the US, right? Like so, and that does not work. And US has a large set of population that uses WhatsApp. This kind of door to door or like going surveyors actually recruiting people, that does not work in the US. So we need to think of different models. And we have another model which is very privacy preserving, which is like an app that people install and it computes some sort of aggregate statistics on the device. So we're working on some of those. But another extension to what I showed you is something that we're very excited about, is scaling up like this sort of thing with opt-in data donation. So we're trying to do, instead of 300 users, we're trying to do 3,000 users. So doing it all across India for the election that's coming up. So sample like 12 districts, 10 villages in each district, and then 25 samples in each location. There are quota samples. You get people from different caste, age, religion, probably political party. And so we're also going to do something similar in Brazil. And US, again, is minor because I'm pretty sure this will not work in the US. We are trying other models that might work. But yeah, the idea is we want to do something where we have infrastructure that can really detect these narratives on WhatsApp and kind of at least we have some pulse of like what is spreading there without being contested at all, and do some sort of awareness as these spread, like so either some sort of debunking within these communities in some way. So that's the idea. So just to summarize, yeah, okay, data collection, WhatsApp is very hard, like, and I showed you different techniques with different sampling frames. And now we have the ability to identify viral content on WhatsApp. Again, we may not be able to say what part of viral content this is, how are we sampling this exactly, but because this is viral, according to some definition on WhatsApp, this is, you can get some understanding that, about the prevalence of misinformation. So, okay, the punchline is the misinformation may not be common. Like we also did some analysis on this data set, not just looking at the viral content, but on actual stuff. And misinformation is not common. Like again, if you look at a general person's feed, the fraction of content that is misinformation is still very low. It's in the low single digits. But if you look at the viral content, it's much, much higher. Like I said, a quarter or something that high. Looking at it from the politics perspective, large-scale spread of misinformation on WhatsApp is very hard and requires extraordinary investment, right? Like think about the investment it takes, like, if you're maintaining hundreds of thousands of workers, a content farm that creates content and then kind of spreads all of this stuff, like that's super expensive. And even if this infrastructure is built, right, like so it's not like guaranteeing you that that this content is going to spread outside of your infrastructure. So you only have control over your infrastructure. So, and one thing we realize is, okay, there is success here, right? So we see a lot of BJP content spreading outside of the BJP network. So that is success, like they've really cracked this. But we don't know the impact. Like we don't know if this does actually matter for election, right? Like I mean, Karnataka, where this 150,000 members were used and a lot of WhatsApp strategy was done, did not work out. Like so, what is the actual impact? I don't know. Solutions for correction of misinformation are still in their infancy. Okay, so this is a summary. Now, some commentary, like just two pieces. First is, misinformation and hate speech on WhatsApp is not dangerous because there's a lot of it, right? Like so, the usual thing that we think about when you think about WhatsApp is, oh yeah, I get a lot of misinformation. It's actually not true. So there's not a lot of it, but it's precisely because these are interspersed with innocuous content from trusted sources. Right? So this is a platform where you get your trusted information from your trusted sources. So if you intersperse that with misinformation, again, I'm not saying this is by design, but this is what's happening, right? So that's what works. So the influence and power of WhatsApp is not in its ability to distribute large quantities of misinformation at a very low cost, but in its ability to kind of expose this sort of trustful communities to selective misinformation. So I think this is kind of the most important takeaway from this, is this sort of aspect of trust. I mean, we haven't explored that, But looking at the sort of prevalence of all of these, and viral content, normal content, all of that, I think this is the most important part that sets WhatsApp apart from some of these other social media platforms. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Questions?
Just a couple of questions. Thank you for this talk. It was really fascinating. Why villages? Why not urban India? What is given that internet use is much more in urban, especially WhatsApp, presumably, posting on Twitter and so on and so on. So why are you focusing only on villages and not any urban India, on urban India? That's one. Second, why only UP? Why not Tamil Nadu, or where there might be an anti-BJP narrative, that, especially Tamil Nadu, now with Sanatan Dharma and all of that stuff that's happening. That was the second thought I had. Third, have you looked at the profile pictures? Do you think that might reveal something about the kind of person or the sort of information that itself might convey to one, when you're going through the messages and then looking at misinformation, coding it as misinformation or hate speech or something. I mean, my aunts have a flag of India, things like that. So yeah, that was it. And one other thing, maybe if you're looking at villages, have you thought of going through voter lists and then selecting a sampling frame based on voter lists, rather than just going arbitrarily from door to door, have at least some kind of a structure that would allow you to go from household to household, or select certain households?
Yeah, sure. So for the villages in UP, so the village part is that, it's deliberate. Like the reason is just that we also are very interested in what this first-time internet users are consuming, right? Like, so these are a majority of the Indians, like hundreds of millions of people are coming online for the first time. A lot of these people are on WhatsApp. So that's the kind of narrative that we wanted to understand. Like, okay, what are these people actually consuming? And the second thing about UP, and partially an answer to this thing about villages, is just convenience and practicality. Okay, we have our team in UP. The people know the stuff there. They can identify influencers there. So it's very easy for us to start with this in UP, especially given the kinds of things that we're doing here. Right? So you're asking someone, okay, if I come to your house and ask, hey, can you give us your WhatsApp data? We pay some money. That's a very fishy thing. Like, and it's a very, so we require, like, just even doing this as a pilot, like, we're not sure if this is going to work, how that's going to work, how people are going to react. And so it had to be in an area where we had some sort of know-how of the landscape, know the people, identify, like, where people will trust us and things like that. Now, once we want to scale this up, actually, Tamil Nadu or Karnataka will be one of the states where we are going to get a district where we are going to sample for information. West Bengal is probably the other where we are also going to get, like, in the expansion, the larger set that we are planning to do. But again, it's mostly about convenience and practical aspects, like where can we actually have a team that is where it's safe for them as well, right? Like, so there's also concerns about that. So so that's the answer. About the profile pic, no, like we are deliberately trying to minimize the amount of data we collect. Like, already we are really getting a lot of data with all the messages in these groups and all of that, like from non-consented users, we do anonymization, all of that, but we're not getting any profile pictures just to minimize the kind of data we get. Like, because already this is super rich data that we're getting, we're actually getting all the messages, right? So we're not getting that. Voter list to sample, again, like the main problem with that too is like it gives you a representative sample, but it does not give you a representative sample of WhatsApp use, right? Like, so even if we are able to sample randomly through voter list, it is not a guarantee that this person we reach is going to actually use WhatsApp and use WhatsApp actively, so they can give us a decent amount of data given the limited resources, money, and infrastructure we have, right? Like, so that's the reason. Like, I mean, a random sample could easily be done through a voter list, but yeah, again, like, it's probably not practical for our. Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to say, first of all, like, this is incredible research. So, like, thank you for doing it. many of us are social scientists in the room, so it's like pretty incredible just to see this kind of wealth of descriptive information and just like the creativity with which you're kind of trying to collect this data. So it's incredible. I just like, I'm a political scientist, and so there are two things that you've said that kind of like really just explain a lot of what's happening today. But I had a bit of a chicken and egg issue, which has to do with, why the BJP, why not other parties, and why the content that is trending is this kind of content and the kind of ability to take back the narrative. And so, the first thing that you said early on in the talk, and I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about it, when you were just showing the aggregate figures for, I think, like data 1 and 2 about how actually misinformation is not that much, right? Like, so. But you were saying, so okay, so why are these people in these groups? And you said, you just kind of said, well, it's because of a sense of community, right? And then it also this whole thing of these good morning messages, like what are these good morning messages, what are they doing? And so when I think of like two things that seem to be happening, one that you didn't touch much about but mentioned, and the other that you did, right? Like why do political parties, if you hear the kind of the classic literature on why they become important, especially ideological political parties, one is a sense of community. The other is this kind of narrative. It gives you, so it both gives you a place in the world and it gives you a narrative through which to make sense of your place in the world. And so it seems as if like, that's what's clearly happening, right? It's both happening. And so I was wondering, one, if you could talk a little bit more about like, what is that place of community within this, especially because I think that point that you mentioned, which is the reason why this is so dangerous, is because it is coming from within your community. Right, like this innocuous. So I was wondering, like, if you could talk a little bit, like that missing part of the community plus the narrative, and then related to that, I'm still like kind of this hand wringing, which is why are other parties not able to do this? Are they not trying? Do they not have the kind of infrastructure in terms of the devotion, or is it that they're trying but not succeeding? But what would success mean? Do we even have some instances, and maybe this is Siddharth's point about Tamil Nadu, or do we have any kind of even a small case study of something that is not this, that succeeds? Not that there can't be misinformation that's not like Hindu nationalist, right? So I'm just kind of curious about that. I had smaller questions, but I'll stop there.
Sure, yeah, I think the answer to both, and we were discussing during lunch with Arushi, is there is support for these narratives in the society, like the Hindu majority. I think that's what Ravish was also saying. The Hindu majority bloc that exists already was talking about these sorts of things in their family, personal conversations, and things like that. And if someone comes and provides you this sort of entertaining beam or video content that actually promotes those biases, like you're happy to just say forward and okay, and these kinds of platforms are just making it easy to amplify those sorts of narratives, right? Like, so I think that's at play with a majority of this, and that's where like a lot of the BJP content is really viral organically, because it actually corresponds to what the biases that these people actually believe and say personally, privately. Now they can easily say that online and spread it to their networks and can get that, right? So I think that's one reason why the BJP is very successful at this. So have other parties not tried? They have tried. Like if you see the distribution of the groups that we have from SP, like there are around 30% of the groups were from SP. But again, like this is a very, very hard thing to achieve and requires a lot of like devotion and like top-down investment from the party saying this is important. And you saw that investment, right? Like there's 150,000 members. That's huge, and they're working on social media. Again, I don't believe that 100,050 number, but it's still like a very, very large number, right? Like, and I don't think any other like local political party either has that sort of resources or is dedicated enough. I mean, most of these local political parties, Congress could do it. They're not doing it. And it's not like you just create a few groups, and this we saw in 2019. Okay, Congress is also creating some groups and trying these things. It doesn't work unless you have all these pieces. You have to have the people, you have to have the groups, you have to have the content, you have to have really meaningful content that supports like what people believe, right? Like for that to actually go viral and happen, that's a very, very hard thing to do. And unless some significant investments are made, like this cannot happen. And nobody has really been able to match this. And so particularly also we saw some other political parties, like some parties in Andhra are trying that Twitter trending thing, like it's nowhere really as successful. Again, these are people who have been doing this for a decade, right? Like, so it's a well-oiled machine at this point. Like, so those things just cannot be replicated very easily. It's not like just a few months before the election you set up your WhatsApp, your social media system, and so it doesn't work that way. So I think that's the reason why we don't see it. Yeah.
Two finger. So this again is the Tamil Nadu question, right? So then when I think about like what can be done, right? And then I think, okay, so then I wonder whether there's like an existing kind of alternate platform, by platform I mean within WhatsApp, but a set of groups that can be co-opted. And here I'm thinking back to the 50s and 60s about how like, you know, the AIA DMK came into power. And what they did was they really mobilized like film, like you know, and this gets back to, you know, what about the SRK fan groups and the kind of, because what they did was they, and this was obviously pre-internet era, but they really mobilized these like fan societies, which existed almost like kind of classic civil society across the rural landscape of Tamil Nadu. And so I'm wondering, like, are there like, so when I think, for instance, of the ADMK, are there like, I mean, he's quite like, you know, obviously MGR is like a yesteryear star, but I'm just wondering, are there like I'm just thinking of like just film like actor appreciation fan groups that through which I'm thinking experimentally, but I'm just thinking like would that be the way to do it in terms, because you know I'm responding to your point about the fact that the reason why the BJP is successful is because there is this kind of like Hindutva hate that exists organically, and so then when you kind of get this, you can say, okay, this is not my personal view, someone else is saying, and so you go out and forward it. So I'm just kind of wondering if you want to kind of have that similar alliance in a way between what's being put out and your kind of affective, you know, investment in such things, then other affective investments are other kind of civil society kind of things, and so I was just kind of curious about whether that's happening, is it a possibility?
Yeah, it's probably happening. Like I'm not, like, not at this scale. Like I mean, nobody's able to compete with this sort of infrastructure. I mean, we haven't looked at it from that venue, like with that angle. Like, but you know, if I show you, I removed that slide just because it's too much information. But like, if you look at the types of groups that exist, okay. So you know, these are the types of groups that we have in our sample. Right, so village, caste, religious. Hindutva, religious is benign religious, like, you know, just the Jai Sri Ram, not just the, you know, happy good morning with religious stuff, but Hindutva is like the BJP, pro-BJP kind of groups. Then there's activism, regional, and others. Others is the majority category, which has a bunch of, like, it's a broad umbrella of, like, you know, I know we're preparing for a job, like we're preparing for civils, and this is a group, or we are a group of friends in this neighborhood, and this is our group. So we do not look in detail at these groups, like specifically, and say, for instance, what is in these groups, or what are there a subset of groups that actually makes sense in this set. Probably there is, like I'm not sure, but I think that's a very interesting aspect. Like, what is a good counter to this, and or should we just give up and say, okay, this is already captured space, and we don't really, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I would look at the others in terms of like Bollywood or particular actor fan groups, because that of the others is something that, what can I ask, what is activism?
Activism is mostly about like, you know, we need government jobs, like a bunch of those kind of stuff. Like it's mostly about like, yeah.
Just to follow up to that, I was wondering the reason that you don't see a lot of anti-BJP content is, could it also be because those people are hiding and like don't want their information to go out to any researchers?
Not necessarily, right? Like I mean, when we ask people what political parties they support, there is like you know, still a non-negligible amount of pro-BJP, like you know, so this is in UP, right? Like so, 25, so you know, 45% of it is non-BJP supporters. So they are part of like, maybe not a part of political groups that are pro-SP, for instance, but still like there might be something that is not pro-BJP there, right? So there should be something. I mean, it's not that it's 95%, 5%, which the results are showing that 95% or 99% is pro-BJP, which yeah.
But the there is a difference between like voting not BJP and like posting on Facebook and then on the news, you see someone got arrested,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a very good question actually. Like if there is some sort of chilling effect of like yeah, I'm not sure. Like yeah, that's a very good question. Like
Which I think would be a case to follow up on Arish, is to actually see what does anti-BJP content look like. Like what is just the realm of things that are being said? Because I think that like there has to be that, right? Like how can you live in India today and not be bothered by like,
I mean, again, it could be there. It's not trending. It's not viral. In the sample we saw in these 2 months. Right? So again, it's a very biased sample, small sample, specific sample. But still, like not having like just having 1 out of 600 is still very, or 2 out of 600 is very surprising. But probably again, like hopefully in the larger sample, or if you look at subsets, I mean, definitely it's on the viral content, but there might be something in some of these. If we specifically look at users who said we support SP or something, maybe there's some different type of content. It's not viral though. Yeah.
Fine.
I'm sorry I missed your talk, so if there are any version of this question that you've already answered, just discard them. So the first question is, I've always sort of wondered, why do you think there will be a relationship between social media or WhatsApp and voting? I see, like for example, it was interesting you said that there's not really a relationship or you don't know, but I really want to understand why do you think there should be a relationship or there would be a relationship? So that's the first question. And the second question is, I mean, from what I've seen, I think like there are lots of other descriptive identities which perhaps are more salient in voting than, let's say, what they are in social media. But did you see, for example, a breakdown of all your descriptive identity, whether it's religion, political party, or caste, and whether there are incentives to participate in misinformation or, sort of from the other side, reduce misinformation? So for example, when I look at this number, 19% SP is actually a very clean breakdown of what the Muslim and Yadav population in UP is like. Obviously not all Muslims or all Yadavs vote for Samajwadi Party, but that's 12 plus 8 is exactly what 19% is. So do you think, for instance, this 19% SP is more invested in pushing back on the misinformation? So do you see those kinds of descriptive identities and differentiation in misinformation? Thank you.
Yeah. So if I answer the second question correctly, you're asking if someone posts misinformation, are we seeing any pushback for that? Is that?
Or you're seeing an incentive for someone who has a certain descriptive identity being more invested in pushing misinformation. So for example, in your case, I would assume that if you are a Thakur or a Brahmin in UP, you're more likely, or you're a non-Yadav OBC or a non-Jata Dalit, you're more invested in the BJP X propaganda. But if the identity is reversed, you're more invested in perhaps pushing back on that information with your own kind of information or disinformation.
We did not do analysis at that level. This is very recent data. Some of this is, probably we might be able to do this data, especially if we scale this up and get a larger sample. But that we did not specifically look at like the actual content and like what are the group level identities and what their messaging is. I mean, one thing is in general, right? Like so these are like whatever groups we have, these are not political groups, and that ties to your first question. These are not political battlegrounds where someone is trying to advance their cause politically versus not like someone trying to advance their. So these are all like regular groups, like about a village or getting together, like where you live together and things like that. So I don't think, I mean, probably not like deliberately. So people are not really trying to win any points in promoting their own political party. That may not be happening. But beliefs might really reflect into what people forward and share. So that might happen. Like I'm not sure. So yeah, that answers also that first question about, okay, why do we think social media and politics should be related? I'm not sure. I don't think it is related. I'm just saying, if 1/5 of your content that is spreading virally is political related, like there, and the surveys that show that people are spending X amount of hours every day on social media, then probably that has something to do with their beliefs and their. It may not translate into action, but at least reflects their beliefs, and that corresponds to some of these ideologies that the parties are pushing. So again, like that could be the reason why there could be some sort of relationship between that, but I don't know. Yeah, I didn't make that clear.
Questions?
Can I just add? Just adding, kind of going with what Bhanu was saying, right? You didn't collect this information for users. You don't have user identity, right? You didn't do a survey of the user to kind of see whether what caste they belong to or what religion they belong to, right? That was something you didn't do. So it would be difficult to kind of look at the identity of the person who is. But just going on that,
This is for users who donated the data, but not for all the users.
right,
in the group.
right,
Yeah.
okay.
So,
So
there-
you did do that for the influencers who
No,
kind
no,
of.
so both, like, so the person who recruited them, but also the person who gave the data, we have that. So this information is for these 300 users who gave us the data. We have their caste, their religion, their age, so we have that data. What we don't have is, so they might have given us data of a group of 50 people. We don't know who else is in that group, right? Like, so, and there, the problem that could arise is that if it's a village group, there might be different castes, different communities. So who's pushing back what narrative and what is viral is not necessarily being that if I donate a group, it does not necessarily mean what is viral in the group I donated is my opinion, right? So that does not correspond one-on-one to what you donated. It could be others in that group and we don't have their identity.
So I have a question about the second data collection methodology, especially maybe for the first also, but I think it's more relevant for second. So you said the second methodology was to go to all the political parties' offices and get added to the private groups. So I was just wondering, is it possible in your 500 group data set to see which users are in which groups? So I'm thinking about, like how does the network orientation looks like? Is it like, for example, BJP groups are like everyone is connected to those groups, but SP groups are connected to only like a subset, and they're only connected to that group and not to Congress groups. So I was just wondering if you, like, for example, so each group is like belongs to a one party, and is it possible to see like which numbers users are like connected to which groups and look at their
Yeah. So we have all the membership data, but it's partial data, right? Like, so it's not a full network that you can construct. Right? Like, so you only know in this group, like, who else is there. You don't know what groups they did not give us and what those memberships look like.
Yes.
So the missing part of the network it could be non-randomly missing, so it could miss. So whatever you find, it may not. You cannot say anything about that.
Right, but you have the users like IDs for all these 500 groups. So I'm just thinking, like, within these 500 groups and these users, like, can you map them and see how the network orientation looks like?
Yeah, we can do that. We haven't done that.
Like, because I'm thinking, like, what if, for example, majority of users are connected to only BJP groups and only BJP groups, and small proportion of the population is connected to SP and small. So in that sense, the viral content might be more for BJP because there's larger population connected to that, or whether maybe it's a different orientation.
That is certainly the case. Even in this data set, you can see 60% of the groups we got were BJP related, right? In the other data set, like, it's over 50% is still BJP related. So BJP definitely is a majority in these, and like I said, this infrastructure and the content ecosystem, all of that exists just because there is a top-down push and they've done this for over a decade and all of that stuff, right? Like, so I think, I mean, looking at it from the network perspective might give us some information, but again, because the network is incomplete, like you really cannot say, okay, this is the reason why this is happening. We already know to a certain extent that, you know, the reason why the content is mostly BJP is because they have a strategy, they have this top-down push, all of that, they have the IT cell, which is very active, all of that stuff. So, I mean, probably now, like, we have a better network setup, like when we are collecting this data, we're also getting each user, who are their contacts, and who did the people chat with, and we can map that with who sent what messages on those groups, and you can do some sort of network analysis there. We haven't thought through that yet, but yeah, that could be interesting.
Like, I guess I'm asking also because maybe from a different reason, like looking at whether the network is segregated in terms of how they connect to groups.
Mhm. Yeah.
Maybe not able to explain this, but like a
Yeah,
different question.
yeah. I think that'll be very interesting to look at, like whether networks and actual content really do match and all of that stuff. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? We talked about solutions to misinformation. I was wondering, like, has anybody thought about solutions to hate speech? And because it seems like it's not even acknowledged as a problem, but what could be tried and has been tried, and is there hope?
Yeah. Okay. That's that's a PhD thesis. So, yeah. I mean, not sure. Like, so one thing that makes things like challenging in terms of correcting hate speech is like there are these counter speech narratives that people talk about and all that stuff. But yeah, because a lot of this is based on the true beliefs and beliefs over, like, you know, past decades and all of that stuff, it's a very hard intervention to actually make any sort of corrections. Yeah, I'm not sure actually, like, but I mean, okay, so one thing we also found, or we just found anecdotally, is again, just similar to the Indian community structure. There's usually in a village, there's a structure, a hierarchy, right? Like where there are, you know, different castes, then different religions. There's a certain hierarchy, and when people are in a village group, right, like the way they talk is very different than when people are in a caste group. Like, so one of the results I showed is caste groups are super full of misinformation, hate speech, and stuff like that. They don't talk like that when they're in a village group, because, you know, either people of other religions are there, other castes are there. So thinking of, like, making use of some of these sorts of hierarchies that exist in the society, maybe using some sort of top-down way of correcting or like hate speech, for instance. Again, using authority as a way. I don't know what that exactly translates to, but you know, that could be one way of doing things. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kiran, and we have a reception outside, so please join us and introduce yourselves to Kiran. So,
Yeah. Thanks a lot,
you.
everyone.